Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on this huge journey, really, across 3.8 billion years of evolution.
That's right. An almost unimaginable timescale.
Yeah, we'll be looking at how life has changed, transformed over that time, and maybe more importantly, how all that history still shapes evolution right now.
Absolutely. And we'll touch on the different scales too, right? The sort of small shifts and the really big picture changes.
Exactly, micro and macro evolution. But, to really appreciate where we are now scientifically.
You kind of have to look back.
Yeah. Look back at what people thought before Darwin. In the West, I mean, the Earth was, what, thousands of years old?
To thousands, yeah. And species, they were just created, fixed, unchanging.
And extinction just wasn't really a thing people considered.
Not widely, no. It's funny, you mentioned Alexander von Humboldt.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant guy.
Absolutely. But our sources say he went to South America kind of hoping, maybe, to stumble across a living dinosaur.
Wow. So fossils were seen, but not as evidence of things dying out completely.
Exactly. The framework just wasn't there yet. And that really colored how they saw adaptation.
Right. So anything complex, like the human eye.
Must be divine design, perfect creation. The idea that messy, natural processes could build something like that, it just wasn't the thinking.
But the human eye, when you actually look at it, it's a bit jury-rigged, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's the blind spot, obviously, where the nerve goes through.
And the nerves and blood vessels are in front of the retina. Light has to push past them.
Which is just not ideal design, you could say. Especially when you compare it to, say,
the octopus eye. Yeah, our sources mention that. Nerves behind the retina, no blind spot. Much cleaner.
It really drives home that evolution isn't aiming for perfection. It just finds solutions that are, good enough to get by and reproduce.
A crucial point. And this whole shift in thinking didn't happen overnight.
No, definitely not. Even before Darwin, people were starting to question the old ideas. Geologists, for instance.
They started seeing the Earth as much, much older, right? Hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah, based on things like erosion rates, how salty the oceans were, stuff like that. And then you had Cuvier.
Ah, the fossils in the Paris Basin.
Exactly. Pretty compelling evidence that, yes, animals could go extinct. That was a big step.
And homology, too. That idea that different animals share underlying structures.
Oh, the Saint-Hilaire and Cuvier debate.
Apparently it was the talk of Europe. Saint-Hilaire arguing that, the five-fingered limb in a human hand, a bat wing, a porpoise flipper.
Points to a common ancestor.
Right.
Shared inheritance. Huge idea. It really set the stage.
For Charles Darwin.
Enter Darwin.
Yeah.
And his truly revolutionary idea. Natural selection as the mechanism, the how, of adaptation.
Published in The Origin of Species, 1859. And his background is fascinating, too. Dropped out of medical school.
Yeah, wasn't for him. Found his passion in natural history.
And then gets on the HMS Beagle at just 22, aiming to figure out how species form.
That voyage was everything. So many key observations.
Like Lyell's geology, the concept of deep time.
Absolutely essential. You need that vast time scale for slow, gradual change to add up. Without deep time, Darwin's theory doesn't work.
Then in Argentina, finding those giant fossil armadillos.
Right next to the much smaller living ones, it just screams connection, change over time.
And finding seashells way up in the Andes Mountains.
Yeah. Proof the Earth itself wasn't static. It was dynamic, mountains rising.
He even saw an earthquake, didn't he, in Valparaiso?
He did. More evidence of a changing planet. All these geological insights were critical.
And then the Galapagos.
Ah, yes. The iconic finches, of course, but also the mockingbirds. Seeing those subtle differences from island to island.
It really drove home how isolation in different environments could lead to rapid adaptation, though apparently it was someone else who pointed out the significance of the finchbeaks later.
Yes, back in London. An ornithologist clarified that they were all finches, just highly varied. That clicked things into place for Darwin.
So he gets back to London, apparently very seasick and swearing off ships forever.
Huh. Yes, seems so. And he's wrestling with all these observations. Then he reads Malthus.
Thomas Malthus on population growth outpacing resources.
Exactly. And that sparks the realization. So there's a struggle, competition. Not everyone can survive and reproduce.
Which leads directly to natural selection, the idea that some variations give an edge.
Right. So by 1838, he's basically got it worked out. The core logic.
Okay, so what are those core conditions? Our sources use a classroom example.
Yeah, it's a good one. So first, you need variation in reproductive success. In the classroom, think. Number of siblings students have. It varies.
Okay, check. Condition 1.
Second, variation in a trait. Let's use height. Dudes vary in height.
Check. Condition 2.
Third, a non-zero correlation between the trait and reproductive success. Now, this is trickier. The studies do show, on average, taller men tend to have slightly more children. So there's a link.
Okay, condition 3, correlation.
And fourth, the trait has to be heritable, passed down. Height is definitely heritable in humans, about 80% heritability.
Got it. Variation in success, variation in trait, correlation, and heritability.
You need all four for natural selection to operate on that trait.
And if you break any one of those conditions, selection stops.
Precisely. Like, imagine a strict one-child policy. Suddenly, there's zero variation in reproductive success. Everyone has one child.
So selection based on number of offspring just stops for any trait.
Exactly. And this brings up neutral evolution. What happens when there's no correlation between a trait and reproductive success?
Things just change by chance.
Pretty much. That's genetic drift. Random fluctuations in how common different gene versions are, especially in smaller populations.
It's not driven in any particular direction like selection is.
No, it's more like random noise. Think about flipping a coin repeatedly. Sometimes you get streaks of heads or tails just by chance. Drift is like that, but with gene frequencies.
Our sources had that graphic, right? 20 populations starting at 50-50 for a gene.
Yeah, and after just 20 generations of pure drift, they're all over the place. Some have lost one version completely, others have it almost fixed.
Those absorbing states where a gene version either hits 100% frequency or disappears entirely, 0%.
Right, and once it hits 0 or 1, it's stuck there, barring new mutations or migration. So drift is random, it removes variation over time, but it doesn't build adaptation in the way selection does.
So this helps explain why we see apparent design in whole organisms, wings for flight, eyes for sight. That's likely selection acting over long periods.
Generally, yes. Selection shapes those complex traits that help survival and reproduction.
But if you look at the DNA level, you often see more randomness, more noise.
Often, yes. Many changes at the DNA sequence level might be effectively neutral. They don't help or hurt much, so their fate is governed more by drift.
Though there are exceptions. Some DNA sequences are definitely under selection.
Oh, for sure. Regulatory regions, genes for crucial proteins, and some whole organism traits might be neutral or just byproducts. Like the human chin may be just a consequence of our faces getting flatter, not directly selected for itself.
Interesting. So microevolution is this dynamic duo. Selection pushing things in adaptive directions, and drift causing random changes, especially when selection is weak or absent.
That's a good summary. Selection and drift are the main engines of change within populations.
Okay, let's zoom out then to macroevolution, the really big picture stuff.
Yeah, the grand sweep of life's history. Major events, big innovations.
Like the origin of Earth itself, 4.5 billion years ago.
And then life appearing relatively quickly after that, once the planet cooled enough for liquid water, maybe around 3.8, 3.9 billion years ago.
And parasites showing up almost immediately, like within the first 100 generations. That's wild.
It suggests that Desco life got complex enough to exploit, something evolved to exploit it. Then, much later, the jump to eukaryotic cells.
The ones with a nucleus, mitochondria, more complex, and meiosis, sexual reproduction.
Yeah, somewhere around 1.5 to 2.5 billion years ago, huge steps. Then multicellularity.
Around 800 million to a billion years ago, leading to fungi, animals.
And then that burst of diversification, the Cambrian explosion, about 550 million years ago. Suddenly, all these major animal body plans appear in the fossil record.
And we can't forget endosymbiosis.
Absolutely critical. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, originating from bacteria that got engulfed by another cell.
And chloroplasts in plants, from engulfed cyanobacteria, happening multiple times even.
These were fundamental mergers that changed the course of evolution. It wasn't just gradual change, it was big transformative events.
Plus the major wipeouts, like the Permian extinction.
Oh, the great dying. Life came incredibly close to being completely extinguished. Probably massive volcanic activity, ocean poisoning. Catastrophic.
And then, much more recently, the rise of flowers.
Yeah, maybe 135 million years ago, really taking off after 65 million years ago. Completely changed terrestrial ecosystems.
When you lay it all out like that, humans really are just a tiny recent part of this enormous story.
A little trig, as our sources put it, on this vast tree of life. It really gives you perspective on the sheer depth of time involved.
And it shows how biology itself, our understanding, has also been assembled piece by piece over time.
That's right. Which leads to the two main ways we explain things in biology.
The proximate and the evolutionary.
Exactly. Proximate is the how. How does it work? The mechanics, the physics, the chemistry.
Like, how does muscle contract?
Right. And evolutionary is the why. Why does it exist in the first place? Why is it designed that way? That's where selection and drift come in. Why do we have muscles structured the way they are?
It provides that historical functional context.
Mm-hmm. And underpinning all of it is this unbroken chain of life.
Continuous parentage, stretching back almost 4 billion years, every living thing connected.
All the way back to the first life and ultimately back to non-living matter.
And even beyond that, the elements in our bodies.
Forged in stars, elements heavier than iron created in supernovae. It connects us not just to all life, but to the cosmos itself. We're literally made of stardust.
That's a pretty profound thought. So wrapping this up, evolution isn't just ancient history.
Not at all. It's happening right now. Constantly, new discoveries are still being made, changing our understanding.
It really makes you think about our own place, doesn't it, within this incredibly long, ongoing story of life, something to mull over.